Three, two, one. Hello, everyone. This is Taco Movie Talks, and we are still in week 8, and I am brought to you here with a very special guest. It is the Rev Horror, and he has a horror review website in which is on this title slide, and I'm also going to link in the description below. Rev, why don't you go ahead and say hi to everyone and tell them a little bit about your website?
Hey guys, thanks for having me. First off, Taco, I appreciate it. Excited to talk about some nice Italian films with you. Um, so I have a horror movie review website where I do a lot of the normal movies that you see reviews on, a lot of the old classics, and a lot of indie stuff. I'm huge on indie horror and trying to support people that are up and coming in the industry. um, I do reviews. I do a lot of interviews. Had the chance to sit down with Mike Flanagan a few years ago and talk about Hush and some of his upcoming Netflix stuff. I'm just a huge fan, man. I've been a horror movie fan since I was 6 or 7 years old, and really haven't ever stopped.
Oh, that's awesome. I know, I think it was on a Reddit post. I saw your website and it was like a kid in a candy store because I think, much like you, I caught the horror bug very early on. And just to see someone who had so much passion for it, it was super cool to see. And very excited to have you on. So thank you for joining us for this talk. And how was interviewing Mike Flanagan? I mean, was there any butterflies? Did you feel like you got a greater insight after getting to talk to him?
Well, I do all of my interviews through email, so it gives me a chance to kind of take a step back, make sure I'm asking all the questions I want to, and I don't forget anything. And it gives the person I'm interviewing an opportunity to kind of, you know, make sure that they're saying what they want to say.
Mhm.
It's actually funny. At the time, Flanagan was tapped to direct the new Halloween movie. So I asked him a couple of questions about that because I'm a huge Halloween fan. And he told me before anybody else basically that they had were not going to let him do it and had gone with David Gordon Green instead. But then he told me, of course, oh, you're not allowed to say anything because they haven't announced anything yet. So I didn't get to break the news, but it was kind of it was a way for him to be able to do that where I'm not live recording him and him giving me information he's not really allowed to give me. So the email definitely helps. But man, I've talked to a couple of scream queens, a ton of indie directors. Have you ever seen Black Mountainside?
No, I have not.
Oh, it's so much fun, man. It's kind of it's like The Thing, but more of an indie slant to it. A lot of like folk horror and stuff like that. And I actually somehow ran into the director on Twitter shortly before, I mean, I guess shortly after it came out. And they sent me like a DVD signed by the whole cast and crew. I got to interview the director, and it was a huge honor for me. And then the movie kind of blew up and was everywhere for a little while. So that kind of thing is really cool. It's nice to be able to get those experiences that you wouldn't have otherwise. It's a pretty it's an honor, honestly, as a horror movie fan, the way that I am.
Hey, that is so cool. Uh, Social media, like the era we're living in, I can't imagine, you know, 20, 30 years ago that we would be able to have the access that we do, and we can reach out to these larger than life people and actually get to talk to them and see, their human side. So it's really cool. And I mean, imagine how difficult it would have been to get an interview with even indie directors, like
Oh
20,
yeah,
30 years ago.
absolutely. Yeah, it's the I always say, and it's one of the things I have actually had a few conversations about it recently, that we're kind of in the golden age of media in general because, before, you go to the movie store, you rent whatever they had, and after a few weeks, maybe you've gone through their whole selection. But I mean, the way it stands now with all the streaming services, we have access to almost every movie ever made, like on our cell phones, and that's just fucking nuts.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's funny you bring up like, go to your local movie rental store. Like that was how I think for me, horror became something that I liked because you would look at the covers of the
Uh huh.
VHSs, and I like the horror covers always looked so cool, and that's how I would like pick out half the movies. Um, and this might show maybe how young or how old I am, depending on where you fall age range. But I remember the cover of 1001 Corpses, and I was like, I have to watch this movie immediately because of how cool it looked. But that's absolutely awesome. And I think we need more people like you who are shining lights in different places in the horror community because there is such a passion in the fan base that I think that will never be quenched. You know, especially with how little it does get the spotlight.
For sure, and it's honestly, it's like nothing else too. I mean, you have fans of cheap, crappy action movies and whatnot, but nothing like you see in horror. I mean, if you have some movie that Hollywood produces, even if it's A-list stars and it's not good or it doesn't gain the traction, you might not find anybody that's seen it 5 years from now. But with a horror movie, you have a cheap, shitty $1,000 shot on video movie that was made in 1992 and was spread around, I don't know, Erie, Pennsylvania, and it's going to have a legion of fans all across the internet. It's completely it's a different genre entirely than anything else out there, and it's something that it's one of the things that made me fall in love is the feeling that, I could do that. Like if I took my well, not the cell phone at the time because this is VHS days, but if I took my old family camcorder in the backyard with my friends from school, we could make a movie as good as this. And there's something that's accessible about that you don't get from Michael Bay or Steven Spielberg or any of those people that you're going to watch on the big screen.
Absolutely. Have you did you ever have like dreams of directing horror films?
Man, it's I mean, of course. I mean, I think everybody, in their wildest fantasies, kind of wants to have something to do with the topics that they love. I don't know. I mean, like, I never made a movie. I wasn't one of those like underground film kiddies or anything. But I would love to. I mean, I've got ideas bouncing around in my head all the time. I don't think I'm at the point in my life where that's probably going to happen.
I hear you. It's definitely, I mean, seeing anytime you watch a like a really good movie though, it always makes you think like I wish I could do that. And there's
Oh, absolutely.
always an inspiration like you said, where you're like I wish I could do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
What we're going to be talking about this week is giallo films. It's a subgenre of horror, very prevalent to Italy. Um, there's horror elements, there's mystery elements, and they often end with a big reveal of, I guess, who the antagonist is. And from my research, I think there was an emergence of this type of subgenre in Spanish films after Italy kind of made it very famous. And we're going to be covering two very popular movies by two very popular Italian horror movie directors in Dario Argento and Mario Bava. And the two films are Deep Red and Blood and Black Lace. And I guess just first thoughts, how did you like the two movies?
I actually really enjoyed them. And it's funny that we picked these two because I'm not always super versed on Giallo. There's so many. I mean, they cranked them out like crazy in Italy, and while I don't know if technically the ones from other countries are considered part of the genre or more just like inspired by kind of thing,
Hmm,
there's so many even just from Italy in the '60s, '70s, and even influential beyond that. I mean, Argento's still making movies, but these movies were so much more entertaining than most of the Giallo. Um, it's they're they're hard to watch at times. They kind of meander a little bit, but
Mm.
these were fairly straightforward with some great kills and a plot that you could follow all the way through. So I enjoyed it. I thought it was brilliant.
I'm right there with you, and I believe you're correct. Yeah, only the Italian would be Giallo, and I guess it inspired Spanish. And then, from what I read, I mean, they said that Giallo very much helped inspire the slasher film,
Oh,
is
absolutely.
which is pretty damn cool to hear that, like Jason, the likes of, all of that stuff, what has is considered by some like the golden era of horror films for, Hollywood and America, was inspired by this subgenre in Italy. Just kind of neat.
Yeah, and I actually, for my site, I actually ended up writing a review of these two movies. They're not on the site yet, but I made that point about Blood and Black Lace, which I thank you for getting me to watch because I had honestly never turned it on before. I like Bava and I like the mystique behind him, but I haven't seen very many of his movies, so it was nice to kind of catch up on a classic that had slipped through. But um, one of the things I mentioned in my review is that as like I said, Halloween is my all-time favorite movie. I mean, I'm not saying my all-time favorite horror movie. It is my all-time favorite movie. I've seen it at least 100 times. I'm a huge fan of everything involved with it, and as an appreciation, as a appreciator of horror history, knowing that my favorite movie of all time probably wouldn't exist if Baba didn't make Blood and Black Lace is just insane. And that's you can see all of those influences through all of the slasher movies. I mean, everybody always credits Psycho, which came out 4 years before Blood and Black Lace, but I mean, that movie is so much more the originator of the slasher genre than Psycho could be. I mean, you've got the body count and the masked killer and everything else. I agree completely, and I think it was a perfect choice by you to kind of dig into the genre of giallo and relate it to later horror movies.
Absolutely. Let's jump into first. Let's dive a little bit deeper into Deep Red by Dario Argento, 1975. And I guess I'll just try to summarize the plot. So we have a pianist who well, it starts with a psychic is in a huge, it looks like an opera house actually, but it's like,
Yeah,
an auditorium of sorts, but I think it is an opera house, but she's trying to show off her psychic abilities, and she senses a psychopathic killer in the room, and kind
which
of
is always what you want to hear from the psychic person you're listening to, of course.
there's a psycho in the room. Yeah, I think everyone
Oh
would want to
shit!
leave.
Yeah,
So cut to, I think it's later that night, a pianist is talking to another pianist, um, right in front of his club, and he sees like they hear a scream, and then they see a woman being attacked. The pianist goes up to the room because he lives in the building, and heads there. I think right after she had been murdered, police come, and they don't know who did it. The pianist tries to uncover who the killer is, and we kind of get more and more insight into the killer's motivation. There's like children's music that plays prior to these killings. The pianist is threatened, and then we think we catch the guy, but then there's like a revelation, which I thought was really cool because I
yeah,
was thinking the same thing that the pianist was thinking. uh, and
yeah,
we'll get to that later. I'm sure you were like, I don't think that doesn't make sense.
yeah.
And then we get the true reveal of who the killer was, and I guess the full backstory of it all. What are your initial thoughts on Deep Red?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that last part because I kind of a lot of times I kind of write the review as I'm watching the movie, and I had written this big long paragraph about how this is really because I hadn't seen Deep Red in 10 years. It's been a long time, and I'd kind of forgotten a lot of the pieces of it. And I'd actually written out this big long paragraph about how stupid this was, and like obviously he couldn't have done. And I was like, oh shit, okay, never mind. They deal with that. They got it. Um, but yeah, I thought it was great. I agree with you. There's a lot of, and that's one of the things too. The way that the main character, the pianist, like you said, um, the way he kind of states out loud the clues, so to speak, to who is and who isn't the killer and who's involved in all those things. It's kind of a staple of Argento, at least, but also the genre as a whole as well. Of kind of like ruminating through the various things that you've seen to recall the audience's mind to things that happened prior. So it's one of those tropes that the genre uses pretty extensively. Um, and Deep Red, honestly, I think is kind of unquestionably the Giallo King. It's if you look up pretty much any top whatever list, it's going to be number one because it hits all the highlights. It's really a coherent story, which again is unfortunately pretty rare for the genre. And it doesn't. It's got some really creepy elements. The kids' music, like you said, was I don't. If I heard that coming from some room in my house, I would not appreciate it very much.
Run the other way.
Um, exactly. Yeah, that's not. I'm not hanging around for that. And then you got the little girl and the unfortunate scene of pinning the lizard to the ground, which I know that Argento has stated they didn't actually do, but I 100% don't believe him because that's exactly what they did. Which really, it was a different time. I get that, but it's still kind of uncomfortable to watch, especially because it was so unnecessary.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
but yeah, I mean, I thought it was great. It's a good movie. There's a lot of really cool kills, and one of the things I really appreciated too was when they asked Argento, how do you come up with these, horrific scenes of violence and everything else. He a lot of times has kind of like a supernatural element to some of the things that he does, but in this particular film, he said he wanted to make the kills something that the audience could identify with. He said, if you shoot somebody, nobody in the audience more than likely has ever been shot, but everybody's burned themselves.
Mm,
Everybody, those kind of things. So he kind of modeled the kills after things that the audience could kind of cringe at and imagine happening to themselves, which was really a brilliant touch.
that's a really good like psychological tip. Like you said, do things that people can relate to cuz yeah, like you burn your face, you know how much that sucks. And that was a
Absolutely.
that was an awesome moment in this film. And everything like you said too, it felt more grounded than what I've come to find from like Phenomena or Suspiria.
Right.
It felt like a really weird case that could really happen though.
Exactly. There was nothing in the movie that was outside the realm of possible. And
Exactly.
that's, you don't have to suspend disbelief. This was a serial killer who actually killed people. I mean, that happens all across the world. So there's nothing that happened in Deep Red that is not something that has probably happened in your hometown. You know what I mean?
hmm and with that facial burn, I wanted to say I thought the effects in this film were like just drop dead gorgeous. They
Spot
were
on. I agree.
so good. And when you tie that in with how coherent, how grounded and how compelling the story was, again going back to what you said, it kind of felt like you were trying to uncover things as the main character is, which is
Right.
that's a staple of any good mystery. You want to kind of
Absolutely.
feel involved with it. I like that a lot.
I agree completely. And it's definitely, I mean, it's a Hitchcock movie with horror elements, more than anything else. And I thought it was great.
Another like key thing that I liked, I thought the cinematography was really, really good. And there's certainly elements of that in Blood and Black Lace where you can tell the person behind the camera is very, very expert in what they're doing. I thought Dario Argento actually just completely knocked it out of the park. It's something he is very, very good at. And this so far for me would probably be the best example of that because they were just unique shots and it kind of added to the atmosphere of the film. There were certain parts where like it kind of you were looking down on our lead character as though he was being watched from the house. And I
Hmm.
like that. It was like a nice creepy element that it like at all times there was something lurking behind every corner, someone watching him.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's one of those things too. My wife in particular is not even a little bit a fan of Argento. She hates the movies. Every time we watch one, she's like, "This is garbage. I don't care about this." Blah blah blah. But it's one of those things that to me, one of the things that's most interesting about an Argento movie is that from the very first scene of the movie, you know you're watching an Argento movie. To me, it's the same way as, any great artist. If you look at a Picasso, you know it's a Picasso.
Mhm.
Or at least you know that it's competently made art. It's 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 not just a movie. There are so many artistic elements to it that it makes a great case for the whole film as art movement. You're not just putting something on film so people will buy a ticket and give you money. You are expressing your artistic vision through the film. And Argento does that probably at least more recognizably than any horror director in history. Um, he makes his films art in a way that most are not able to do so. And you're 100% right. He knocks this one out of the park. There's so many great things from the overhead shots that make you feel like he's being watched to the flashes of red and all of the color palette that he loves to use. I mean, it's you're absolutely right.
And those elements that you just went into, I think, is why it holds up so well.
For
Um,
sure.
just to look at it, I mean, it's almost insane to think that this film came out nearly 50 years ago,
Right.
and
Absolutely.
I mean, it could go toe to toe with a lot of modern horror films for sure. I mean, the top tier ones you might give more of a shine to just because they're newer. They might have fresher takes, but I mean, besides the 0.0001%, I think this would do absolutely well, and why it was such a great discovery for me to watch this for a first time.
For sure. I agree completely. And definitely, I mean, it's not 2020 cinematography. I mean, it looks like it's from the 70s,
Hmm.
but that's okay. It's not you have to appreciate it for the time in which it was made, both from an artistic standpoint and honestly, and Deep Red. I don't know how you felt about it, but there are certainly some problematic things that happen in the movie from a modern perspective. Um, and Italian cinema is full of that too, which is kind of what makes it more grindhousey and interesting than a lot of the stuff that is being released now. But I mean, there's so many things that date it to the time period in which it was made, but from a quality perspective, you're dead on. I mean, it stands up to most of the stuff that they're making today.
From a plot perspective, we use so you had seen it 10 years earlier. So if if you felt the same way now, but when you originally watched it, were you able to crack the case prior to it? Because I was guessing like each and every single character. I was like, oh, it could be this person, it could be that person. I mean, and that was something that I liked is that it kept me on my toes. That like when the reveal finally happened, I was still surprised.
Yeah, I didn't crack it for sure, but I honestly a lot of times when I'm watching the more mystery type genre, I really don't try to be honest.
Okay.
I think to a certain extent, depending on what it is, maybe I'll try to guess, oh, this has got a big twist ending, and maybe I'll try to guess the twist. But anytime you've got, an Argento or Hitchcock or anything like that, I kind of try to just go along for the ride. So I don't know that I really necessarily tried to. guess the killer so much as I just was interested to see how he was going to show them to me.
Okay.
If that
And
makes sense, you know what I'm saying?
absolutely. So, and we touched on this briefly before. So his pianist friend who was like at the location of the first murder. So he's kind of ruled out as a suspect. There's a slight, and this is where we're into spoiler warning, spoiler
It's 50 years
territory.
old. It'll be all right.
He is the person tied to kind of a drawing that is the house that they have determined is key to this case. That's been like I think it's painted over. That's not like muck, is it? I think it's painted
Or
over.
like wallpaper or something. I don't know. It looks like he kind of chips it away or chisels it or whatever.
Yeah. So he finds that exact drawing, and there's like a split second where I think we both had said we thought, "Oh, it's this guy," and it's like that doesn't make sense. And then there's a further reveal where he was traumatized by a murder by the true killer who turns out to be his mother. Um, when it was that guy, and then there's like the reveal, it's like he's not the real person, he's just connected. I liked the fact that they had made one other character close to the other pianist. It was like his boyfriend.
Yeah.
So then it made it so it was okay, it could be his mom or it could be the boyfriend. So it kept the mystery going just a little bit longer as opposed to, okay, it's definitely the mother now.
Well, and that's actually a really good point and kind of something that I didn't get into my review, so it's interesting to talk about here. Um, so Giallo or Gialli, however you want to say it, in particular, often revolve around I don't want to say a strong female presence, but at least a competent female presence. There's a I mean, hell, Argento movies, a lot of times you find out that women are the killers or that women are more involved than they would have been in other films that were made around the same time. And what's interesting about this movie from a historical perspective is that, when he has the guy's boyfriend who is, transgender or transvestite, they don't really delve too much into it because it was the 70s. But it's interesting that you almost are led to his boyfriend being possibly the killer because in that era they viewed them as more woman-like than man-like. So yes, it does end up, being the guy's mom, but from a giallo perspective of women being more involved from that view of homosexuality in the 70s, you're not in their mind making the gender difference between that guy's boyfriend and that guy's mom. So at, now, when we watch that movie from a 2022 perspective, you're like, okay, this guy's a guy, gay or not, and this woman's a woman. But in the 70s, they were both viewed more womanly than male. So it really does kind of keep up with the tropes of the genre as a whole and make the audience at the time, especially, still guessing until the final frames because Argento did use so many women killers and so many women who were involved in the finales of his films. So, like I said, I don't think it has quite the impact as far as the guessing game, knowing that today. But at the time, I mean, it was probably a brilliant twist that people didn't see coming because it does kind of make sense that the other pianist's boyfriend was the killer, and then it turns out to be his mom instead.
That's a like an awesome like historical perspective to kind of, give us the insight of what the audiences were looking at then. And it's neat that you bring that up because it brings to mind there was a scene, and if I let me know if I jog your memory on this, but there was a female journalist, and there was a scene where she wanted to arm wrestle our main character.
Yeah,
and there was a bit of a dialogue where it was like, "You don't think a female can do this." And
Right.
while I was watching it, I'm like, I feel like they're trying to point the arrow towards it
Ah,
being a female killer.
you know
And
what? I didn't really think that at the time, but you may be exactly right. That may have been a little bit of foreshadowing.
altogether, I mean, this was just it was an awesome movie, and I really, really liked it. Did you go back? I did not myself. When the painter, there was a huge point that there was a painting missing. Did you happen to catch it on your viewing, or did you ever rewind to see if the mother's face was indeed there when he walked through the apartment?
I didn't know. You know, they show that scene again at the ending, but I didn't go back to see if that was just kind of a later insertion or not. Um, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if it was, but I didn't catch it the first time for sure.
That would be an absolutely, like, awesome little Easter egg if they truly showed who the killer was, and, like, maybe one guy in the theater, like, caught it as it happened. He's like, "I see a person there. I know who it
I
is."
know who that is. Yeah, for sure.
So, do you have well, let's get to ratings. What would you rate this out of 10, out of 5, out of whatever system that you like to use?
Oh man. You know, when I write, I don't usually actually do ratings. So, shoot, you know, it's hard because it really is a product of its time. And I do think that, you know, compared to a lot of the more modern movies, it holds up, but it only holds up to a certain extent. I'd probably give it like a seven, maybe.
Okay.
Um, I think it's the best Giallo, but I also think that there is a reason why it's not an extremely popular genre. Um, and sometimes it does suffer from things that more modern cinema doesn't. So I'd be comfortable with a seven.
That's very, very close to mine. My rating would be a 4 out of 5 stars.
Yeah,
So we're pretty darn close there.
I
I
think that's
agree
fair too.
with you. I agree with you. I think, and probably the more I'll watch it, the more I will come to your side of the spectrum. For me, it's not new in the way that it's obviously inspired films that I've watched, but it is in a different way where I just have never seen the genre itself before.
Right,
But I can see if you've watched like 20 Giallo films, because even in the limited amount that I have seen, there is there is a formula to it.
for sure. Well,
So
and that's honestly that's a big part of the genre as a whole because, you know, and I don't know how much research into kind of the origins of it you did, but the whole purpose or the reason why they call it giallo is because giallo is Italian for yellow, and back really post World War II, um, kind of detective novels, or not novels, kind of like dime store paperback type things,
they were
were
yellow, right?
massively popular. They were yellow, yeah. They had a yellow cover, so kind of the way we view like romance novels that maybe your mom read when you were a kid is kind of where these things come, but from a true crime detective novel perspective. So they were formulaic in much the way that a lot of the movies, a lot of the serials, the Lone Ranger and Batman or Superman or whatever at the time, they had a formula that they always followed. So while I certainly think that giallos in general, they tried to kind of be surprising and one up each other and be more mysterious, but they do absolutely follow some sort of formula, no matter which film it is that you're picking up.
Absolutely. Let's. Do you have any final thoughts on Deep Red?
No, I don't think so. The one thing I would say though is that that weird doll thing is completely unnecessary and scary as hell. I
Absolutely, yes.
I don't know where it came from. It was just kind of like, what the hell is that?
Yeah, and, oh, another point that I wanted to kinda make, um, do they ever go in was the mom ever, like, institutionalized or in prison or in a mental asylum? Do they go over that? Because that was the one disconnect, is that
Yeah.
she murdered the father, and then the murders just start up again.
Well, I think too, and they kind of mentioned in that flashback scene where the father was like, "Do you need to go? We need to take you to the hospital." Blah blah blah, which kind of I think insinuated that at least she had been previously institutionalized.
Mm,
But it seems to me like largely she was just kind of one of those relatively wealthy socialites who kind of was a shut in and stayed in her house and everything else. I don't know that they completely explain why the murders started up again, but again, I think it's one of those things with the Giallo is a lot of times the plot is not fully fleshed out. You've got these little hints of, oh, she's a psychopathic killer, blah blah blah, but they don't take the time to develop the character development or the backstory, or even like you said, the time in between when she killed the kid's dad and when she is currently killing again. They don't really go too much into that. Um, it's more of just kind of a audience reveal of, oh, she's a crazy killer more than anything else. You don't really have any further need because it's just a 2 hour movie and it's a fun little ride for the fans. So I don't think so. I don't think there's any indication that she was in an institution or something in the meantime.
yeah, I guess that's just, and I have never been like this, but the more I like, I'll sometimes, if a like, it's not in this one a plot hole, I don't think, but when some of those thoughts come into my head, I it stays there until I review it and I have to, like, mention it, you know? Not that
Yeah.
it took me out of the film whatsoever, but
No, and I
just
think that is also part of it too. I think you're right. I think that it doesn't really take you out of the film. And there's
mm.
so many people nowadays, now that we're modern film critics and everything that want to point to, oh, well, this is a plot hole and they missed this and this was a loose end that never got tied up. That was the '70s. Nobody cared about that. Like, they had some nice kills. They revealed who the killer was. If you get spoiler alert, decapitated by an elevator at the end, it made the audience happy. You know what I mean? Nobody was super picky about what was going on.
That, that decapitation kill, I as soon as I saw the necklace get stuck in the elevator,
Oh yeah,
my first thought, and I think, is it Final Destination 2 that has a similar
yeah,
kill to that? That was my
yeah, yeah,
brain immediately went to that.
yeah. And that's another one of those like echo reverberations that you can see to modern horror. I mean, there's no way. And the scene you're talking about in Final Destination 2 is the one where the guy has the prosthetic hands and it touches, or the prosthetic hook hands, and it touches the girl's ponytail and kind of drags her up the wall as the elevator's going up. There's no way that they did not have some kind of exposure to deep red before they made that. There's no way. The scene's too similar. Ultimately, I think that girl gets away, but there's no way that they didn't have some kind of deep in the corners of their mind a reference to Argento in that. There's no way.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's transition into Blood and Black Lace. Do you wanna give a brief summation of the plot of this film?
Sure. Yeah. So the movie's basically about a fashion house in shoot, I don't know where it is. I guess Italy, Rome. I don't know, one of the Italian cities. And models start coming up dead. They start getting murdered and in and around the city and in and around the modeling agency. Um, they start investigating. The police come around and start investigating all of the people who had kind of even a tenuous connection to the person who died. And eventually, it kind of, as more and more models die, it starts to kind of eliminate the suspects in a very, standard almost mystery killer type scenario.
Yeah, absolutely, and you had mentioned at the beginning, Um, Halloween in this film, you can definitely get a great sense of this inspiring that for sure. And
Absolutely, or at least this inspiring something else that inspired Halloween. You know what I mean?
yeah, absolutely. And in some ways, it felt very ahead of its time. It's pretty crazy to think that this film came out in 1964
I
because
know.
I liked the color palette, the lighting, and the shots were very, very like really good. Um, it looked crisp, like it looked very
Absolutely.
clear. And another like standout, I really liked the like opening shots where they just have shots of each character who's in the film. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was
Yeah,
a
and that's go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's a great way to kind of introduce the cast. That I think it was the
Sure.
first time I've ever seen something like that.
Well, and it's really an older movie type thing. They did that a lot, back in those days. And that's actually one of the notes that I had about the film that I thought was really interesting. And like I said before, this was the first time I'd ever gotten a chance to see it, so I kind of appreciated it. You can very easily trace old Hollywood to new through this movie. I mean, it looks every bit as crisp, and I mean, it's magnificently shot. I mean, Bava does a great job through this of making a movie. Like it looks like a Hollywood production from any of the old classic Hollywood movies, but it's got so many new elements. It's got the blood and it's got the color. I mean, the color by itself. Um, Not to mention, the tracking shots and the zooms and whatever else he uses. You can trace old Hollywood to so many films, even today, that we're seeing being made directly through this movie. And a lot of times, old Hollywood movies kind of stand alone. They're black and white, they're pretty, they're whatever, but they're old Hollywood. You don't have any question about when it was made. You don't have any question about you know how how those people felt about the movie that they were making. But when you've got a movie like Blood and Black Lace, you've got a direct lineage from that, not just to Halloween, but to modern movies in general. I mean, it really is, it's a Hollywood movie in Italy.
Exactly. Yeah, I think a lot of people probably would be, if they knew nothing of this movie, would think this is a Hollywood movie.
Absolutely, especially if you watch the dubbed version.
Yes, which I did. Did you as well?
I actually didn't. I watched the Italian version.
Oh, that's cool. I
Yeah.
wonder if there's any. Well, no, I guess if it's dubbed, there's probably not going to be too many differences. Um,
Well, it's a lot of times with Argento there are, and it's really weird if you because a lot of times I watch movies with subtitles either I'm at work or wherever else, or the wife's asleep and I'm trying to wake her up, whatever. So I watch movies with subtitles, and it's really interesting because if you take an Argento movie specifically, a lot of times it will be in Italian, but you will have the director provided subtitles there. But then if you've got the subtitles on as well, you'll basically have two sets of subtitles, and sometimes they say wildly different things with completely different meanings. So it's really hard to tell because the ones that Argento provided, you would think would be more along the lines of what he wanted the audience to get.
mhm.
But when you have these subtitles created by whoever down the road, whoever put them over the movie, sometimes you do get completely different explanations for what the characters are saying. It's also really weird too because the way that really I think most Italian movies, because I saw this watching the Italian version of Blood and Black Lace, um, it's the audio is dubbed even in Italian. So like how you can always tell kind of when you're watching a dubbed movie how what they're saying doesn't completely match their lips.
Mhm.
It may come relatively close, but it's clearly audio that's been recorded after the fact. And that happens even in the Italian version is some of the things that they're saying, that that person is not the one, or at least not at that time, saying those words. So it is kind of a weird, like, kind of like disorienting effect that you get. Even if you watch it in the original Italian, that's kind of an interesting way to see the movie.
I know what you're talking about, and I
It's
guess
weird.
it is weird, and I had heard that, with Argento specifically, that this is a case where I think the lead actress is American, but other
Yeah,
people are foreign on the cast. But like you said, regardless of what language they're speaking, they will dub over everything, even if they were
yeah,
saying it in line. And he said, like that, the one of the co-hosts that I've done videos with prior had said he likes it, especially in Suspiria and Argento movies as a whole, because it kind of adds this element where it's like a dream-like things
yeah.
aren't quite right with what's going on, and it kind of puts you in this headspace that things are weird what's going on now.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't know how much of that was intentional and how much of it was Italy right after World War II. And they don't have access to a lot of the things, or didn't have access to a lot of the things that we had in America because of, they were devastated after the war. But I don't know how much of that was intentional and something that Argento, specifically Argento, although you do see it throughout, was really trying to accomplish. But it certainly does. You're right. It kind of makes everything just a little bit off kilter and a little bit kind of, like I said, disorienting. It kind of gives you that something's not quite right here. Something's a little bit off.
Exactly. A little bit with this film, it felt a bit more subtle, especially with like the effects and the brutality of the kills. Like the makeup was definitely good, but you weren't seeing the same effects that you saw in Deep Red in this film. I don't know if classier is a good way to describe it, but it was much more subtle with how the deaths were handled.
It was for sure, and I think you're right. I think that's part of it. It also may be, Deep Red was 11 years later. I
Hmm.
mean, Deep Red was 1975, so by that point you had gone through, a lot of the, Italian gore, um, type stuff. I mean, or at least you were starting to. A lot of those movies, that were the precursors to, Fulci's Zombie and those kind of things had already kind of been made. So while I don't think that you had, to the extent that they later ended up doing, in a lot of Fulci's work and things like that, but you did have those beginnings of kind of trying to push the limits and trying to create more gore, more titillation for the audience, more of that grindhouse feeling, which was all throughout the 70s and really hadn't started in the 60s when Bava made Blood and Black Lace. Um, Another one of the things that I kind of noted too, when comparing the two directors, Argento makes the hell out of an Argento movie.
Hmm.
When you're watching an Argento movie, no one else can do it. No matter who has tried to make a movie like Argento, it never looks like Argento. But Bava is probably a better director. Um, the movie, like you said, classier is absolutely a great way to put it. The movie looks like a Hollywood movie. It
Hmm.
doesn't look like some weird fever dream of an Italian guy like a lot of time Argento's does. And I think Bava does a great job of kind of showing that, like, no, like, I'm not a horror movie director. I'm a movie director. Like, I know what I'm doing.
Hmm.
And that's, I really get that running all through Blood and Black Lace. Is like, it's just a really well made movie.
Oh, I completely agree with you. Um, it keeps you kind of trying to get more information on each of the characters. You kind of feel like you get a little bit of insight every time someone's dropped into a scene, whether someone's more paranoid than others, and that was pretty cool. And I really like the way that the plot unraveled with this. Like the killer being very interested in the diary that comes
Yeah.
to we kind of come to find out that it alludes to a debt that the killer owes,
Yeah,
and how it kind of drops seeds at the very beginning as to like how um I guess the boss of the modeling agency, is that what proper title you would say for the
yeah,
co-conspirator?
I
How
think that's fair.
Yeah, how she had come to her wealth, that her husband just went missing, which as a detective that would be a huge red flag.
Yeah, you would think.
Um, so you get those kind of, and I think they also allude to the killer being in debt in other ways too that aren't actually completely attached to the diary. And that was a that kill in particular, I it wasn't able to make it click for me, but the woman who had the diary when she was killed was certainly a lot different than the other murders that had been done prior.
For sure. I mean, you're talking about the one that got basically kidnapped, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It wasn't kind of like a quick dispatching of somebody. They clearly wanted to get whatever information she had about whatever, and even though she ends up getting kidnapped because the police are on their way up, you kind of get the feeling that that wasn't going to be a quick death for her. They had to do what they had to do to get whatever information they needed.
Yeah, and I thought bringing in the male suspects to be held overnight and then a murder happening while they were being held was another very nice twist that kind of
Absolutely.
it made you wonder. You're like, okay, well, I kind of thought it was one of these guys, so I guess it's not. And then it comes to an even bigger twist that it's, two co-conspirators committing these
Right.
acts together. And then another twist after that was that the male killer was trying to take the wealth of the female producer at the very end, and she ends up living through basically this kind of booby trap that he had set for her.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And it really is a great way to kind of give you the red herring and throw you off and make you not really quite know exactly where it's heading, which again, the more you get into Giallo, the more that they have these twists that are just like, what? Like, what do you, this is stupid. Like, there's no point in doing this. And Baba in this movie, he had a point in doing what he did. He laid it out like a well put together story and made it to where your questions are answered. Why does this happen? Well, I'm going to show you why it happens. It was really, it was coherent. It was well told. It was a movie and a plot that didn't really have any massive gaps that the audience had to kind of fill in on their own. And actually, one of the things I had thought about as well, we were talking about the influence of the movie and the movies that kind of came after. I was seeing shades of like the usual suspects in that lineup. You've got those guys standing along the wall in the police station when they all get arrested. I mean, that scene, if you had added just a little bit of humor, I mean, that's Kevin Spacey and the usual suspects. So
Exactly.
I think those things really do just kind of echo down through history. These movies are incredibly influential.
Oh yes, absolutely. Um, there was really only two gripes that I had with this movie.
All right.
Um, it was the scene where the woman found a dead body in her trunk,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, I, I think there's probably an explanation, but it didn't make sense while I was watching it, and I might have missed something. But why did she hide the body?
Why didn't you like grab it and take it inside her house? Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know. That didn't really make a lot of sense to me. And maybe it's an Italian thing too. It could be like a cultural thing, but I don't know. I kind of thought the same thing. I was like, how about you leave that there and call the cops? Like
exactly.
that's, or maybe it could have just been a matter of her thinking that if she called the cops and said, "Hey, there's a body in my trunk," that would make her a suspect. Maybe that's more along the line of the way they wanted you to kind of think about it, but they didn't really explain that. And then to just kind of go into her house and like kill her immediately after that was just kind of like, well, I mean, all right, I guess. I mean, I get kind of what you were going for, but by killing her, you kind of eliminate that possibility there. That probably wasn't well thought out.
Exactly. Yeah, like I the logical explanation I think is the one that you said, is that it looks suspicious. Um,
Right.
Staircase, trunk, in my mind, both look suspicious, but probably she
Sure.
had plans to make it look suspicious. It did, however, allow the scene to further unfold to where it made her look, well, it didn't make her look more suspicious, but it was able to get the butler like kind of out of the scene for her to be killed.
Right. Yeah, and that's true. And like we were saying before, a lot of times it's kind of a formulaic A plus B equals C kind of scene.
Hmm.
Oh, well, the butler's there. We got to get rid of him. Let's contrive a way that we can make her want to get rid of this guy. So, I mean, that's probably a big part of it. You're right.
And then I loved the reveal of the ending. I thought it really tied the plot together. It was all very good plot wise. Um, Side tangent, like you had said, there's more problematic things. Certainly when the killer like slaps the producer when she's like frantic, that was definitely don't see that a whole lot in 2022 movies, that's for sure. Um,
No, and honestly, I think that's also for sure to a certain extent a product of their time. But
mhm.
I tell you, I've actually got a review coming up on the site fairly soon that compares The Ring and the Japanese Ringu. And it's one of the things I noticed in that movie is I don't know how long ago it's been since you've seen The Ring, but the whole part where Naomi Watts has to go down into the well and try to get the little girl out of the well. Well, in the Japanese one, he's like, hey, he goes down first. The male character goes down and tries to kind of scoop her out of the well, and he's getting tired because he's digging through all the stuff. And he kind of climbs out of the well and he talks to the woman. He says, "You need to go down there and get her. You need to go down there and get it." And she's saying, "No, no." And he just slaps her right across the face. And I'm like, you know, it's got to be cultural too, right?
Yeah.
Like there's got to be some kind of like it's in America, people would be like, "Whoa, we're taking this movie off." But you know, and I mean, Ringu was made in 1998. I mean, it's not 1974 or 1964 as this movie. So I think certainly it is definitely a product of the time, but I think it also does have a little bit to do with the Italian culture, as the Ring original had to do with Japanese culture too. Where maybe you're allowed to slap women in the face. I don't know. I don't want to try it, but it certainly doesn't seem like anybody really had a problem with
Booking a ticket to Japan right now. Just
it. May not want to say that on recording.
yeah, that's true. No, I have no intentions to slap women.
Disclaimer: we do not endorse, nor do we. No, I gotcha.
um, the ending when the woman, murders the killer, and
Mm,
then that's like all she had left, and we're left with both killers dead as the phone is ringing off the hooks. And I I think there is some credence to them deciding to go it that way, but I was just kind of thinking it there might have been just a better execution of doing that, because it's like, okay, you fell off your building, you know, and you make it back, and I was thinking, and this could sound completely stupid, and it might even be too much for 1964, but she shoots him, she calls the police, fade to black, and then you hear one more gunshot to like insinuate she kills herself at the end.
yeah.
I thought would have been a neat way to kind of, because I thought that might be what they were going to do, and I thought that might have been a better way than she had enough to come all the way upstairs, murder him, and then she just happens to die as well.
That's not a bad idea. I think honestly, I think we were supposed to think she was already dead.
Mhm.
Um, that she collapses and everything, and that's her dying rather than whatever else. So I don't know that they necessarily thought that the gunshot was necessary.
Mhm.
Um, because I believe that you're supposed to assume that she's dead.
She is, yeah.
Um, but it is also hard too because even if that's something that they wanted to do, it is still important to remember when you're reviewing these movies and when you're watching them from a more historical perspective. Is Bava and Argento are excellent horror directors, but they're not on the all-time greatest directors list either.
Mhm.
They're still horror movie directors from Italy in the 60s and 70s.
Mhm.
So they're not Coppola, they're not Spielberg, they're not any of those that A-list quality directors. So even if that had been something that he would have initially thought was a good idea, I don't know that he would have had the technical expertise to determine if that was the right direction to go. But all that being said, I do think we were supposed to just kind of assume that she died and the police were going to pick up the phone and come over anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any it would you wanna give a rating to this film as well?
So I like Deep Red better, but I do think that Blood and Black Lace was probably a better movie per se, or at least a better made movie.
Mhm.
Me personally, I would give it like a 6.5 or so, maybe even a 7. I think as far as a straight Giallo movie, I don't think it was as good as Deep Red, but I do think that as a movie, I do think it was beautiful, beautifully shot, beautifully done. Um, and like I said before, I do think that Bava is a better overall director than Argento when he's not trying to make an Argento movie. So I'd give it like a 6.5 or 7. I think they're very close. They're very close to being equally good in my opinion.
I agree with you. I'm right there with you. I gave this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. So I think we both had a similar taste. The I guess the thing that edged it out for me, as far as finding Deep Red to be slightly better Giallo, was I just like the effects more, honestly, and
Sure.
I thought those aspects were really cool and gave it the slight edge. But like you said, there's certain things that are definitely executed better in this film when compared to Deep Red.
Well, and one of the things that I did actually like a good bit more about Blood and Black Lace compared to Deep Red is Deep Red does drag at times in a way
Hmm.
that Blood and Black Lace didn't. That whole scene when he is investigating the house in Deep Red just seems to take forever. Um,
Yeah.
and it's actually funny. I actually mentioned this in my review, and it was an accident the first time I watched it. I was watching it on PlayStation or something. I had the little controller next to me, and I went to get up, and I like tapped the joystick, and it fast forwarded the movie at 1.5 times speed, and that goblin song that's played over him investigating the house is amazing when it's fast forwarded a little bit instead of being like I was like, holy crap, that's a much better song when you make it a little bit faster. So I do think that scene in particular probably could have been shortened by even 5 minutes,
Hmm.
which is a massive amount of time to take off of a guy investigating a house. So
Yes.
I do think Deep Red dragged a little bit, which is what I think made it a 7 as opposed to a 7.5 or an 8. But I also do think it is a slightly better movie when viewed through a horror movie perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. The Like you said, the other movie is longer, but you definitely feel that time.
Yeah,
It's not paced so quickly where you're like, "Oh man, I can't believe that was 2 full hours." Where
yeah.
Whereas this is, nearly 30 minutes less, and it has a pretty good pace to it, so it never drags quite the way that Deep Red does.
Well, and that's pretty common. Honestly, it's pretty common of all movies around that time anyway. I mean, even older Hollywood movies. And I think the real difference between, I don't know, Gone with the Wind and Bava and Argento is that they're not as competent as directors as some of those better directors of the time. So I think that, when the movie drags and when you have those slower scenes, it's not necessarily that a better director would have cut them as much as it is a better director would have made them more compelling.
Mm,
So instead of feeling like it was dragging, it was more entertaining even when it was going slower. So I definitely do think that that is a knock against both movies, but certainly much more so Deep Red. Um, and Blood and Black Lace was a lot tighter. It was a lot faster paced. Um, but like you said, Deep Red was a lot more pretty to look at. So
mhm.
you kind of have to go with whatever is your preference, whether you like perhaps a more tight, compelling movie or whether you like Argento's art. And if you don't appreciate Argento's art, you're still probably going to hate Deep Red, even though it's a better movie than
Yeah,
most of what he made.
very much, like you were saying, like a Picasso, like his films are very much him,
For
very
sure.
very unique to him, and yeah, if you don't like that, it might be hard to find anything by him that you aren't, put off by.
Yeah, it's. I mean, and having seen a good bit of Argento's work, um, even from the beginning and the Animals trilogy with Four Flies on Gray Velvet, um, Bird with a Crystal Plumage, and Cat of Nine Tails, they are very different because they're much more crime oriented than they are horror oriented. But they are clearly an Argento movie. There's all of the hallmarks, not only of Giallo as a genre, but also as an Argento movie, and they're still worth a watch. I mean, it's horror history, so you kind of have to go through them if you're a really big horror fan, anyway.
Mhm.
But they're definitely, you're right. I mean, like I said before, you watch an Argento movie and 5 minutes in the movie, you know you're watching an Argento movie, and nobody else really comes close to making a movie that matches the aesthetic that he creates in every single thing he's ever done.
Absolutely. Not to put you on the spot, but if you had, I don't know, Argento or Bava, would you have any recommendations, what to watch next from either one that you really liked?
Oh man, that's a good question. I mean, like I said, if you're looking at it, can you hear me? Okay, my headphones died.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can
Okay.
hear you good.
You know, if you are a huge fan of horror and like you're looking at it from um, a historical perspective, I definitely do recommend digging into a lot of Argento's work. Like I said, even those first three movies are not technically horror, but they do have enough of those shades of Argento and a lot of the same color palettes and shots and everything else, along with some really cool twists that make them worthwhile and worth watching. For Bava, I'm a huge fan of A Bay of Blood. I watched that for the first time just a couple of years ago, and I loved it. And I know it's one that's very famous that he's made, and a lot of people have seen it. But I did not expect it to be as good as I thought it was. And there's a kill in A Bay of Blood that is almost shot for shot remade in one of the Friday the 13th movies, um,
Wow.
where the couple's having sex and the killer stabs through both of them with a big pole.
That's
Like, and that's,
iconic. I
yeah,
had no idea it came from
and
Bava.
that came straight from Bava and A Bay of Blood. Um, it's a little bit more trippy, which you see in a lot of Bava's later stuff. So, you got kind of that 70s psychedelic, that kind of thing going a little bit in there. Not fully fleshed out really, but it's fun, it's quick, there's a lot of great gory kills. It's Bava delving more into the Argento style gore than you see in Blood and Black Lace. Again, it's not as good of a movie, but it's more entertaining perhaps than Blood and Black Lace is. So I highly recommend that one. As far as the genre, honestly, I love Italian movies in general.
Hmm.
Even when you go to, Pasolini and Salo and, all of those movies that they made, throughout the 70s. I'm a huge fan of Italian movies in general. The Polizia movies that they made are fun, and it just really kind of depends on your taste. The good thing about those types of movies, though, is if you watch, I don't know, two of them and you don't like them, just avoid it
Hmm.
because they're all so similar that if it's not your thing, it's not your thing. And that's okay because there's plenty of movies from plenty of countries that may be your thing. But Italian movies are so similar in the way that they're set up. At least Italian gialli and horror from that era that like you really it's either your thing or it's not.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm gonna have to check out Bay of Blood because
Oh, it's so much fun.
that
It's so
sounds.
good.
And it's funny because I think this is also a Friday the 13th. Um, I was watching Fulci this week, and it was in The Beyond. I'm
Yeah,
if I'm not mixing up movies at this point, but there was a scene. Yeah, it was The Beyond where someone fell back into one of the like huge giant nails, and their
yeah,
eye popped out with the nail, and I
yeah.
was like, I've seen that one before.
Yeah, I think that was Friday the 13th 3, the 3D part of it, where they wanted it to like come out at the screen. Oh, yeah, I could be mistaken, but that sounds right.
Yeah,
Yeah, and there really is. It's easy. It's much easier to tell when you watch 80s horror the direct influence that these Italian horror movies made. But you see those shades even to today. I mean, you see so many things that I mean, even if you look at like the moody horror and the moody scenery and aesthetic and ambiance of movies like even It Follows.
hmm,
That doesn't get made if these two guys and Fulci weren't doing what they were doing in the 60s and 70s. It doesn't get made. Those movies owe so much to this time period, and that's ultimately what led me to dig into Giallo and to start buying these movies and watching them is because as someone who really does appreciate the history and wants to learn why what I love is the way it is, I mean, these movies are quintessential horror history.
absolutely. Do you have any closing thoughts with Blood and Black Lace?
Um, it was like I said, it was a lot better than I thought it was going to be. It's another one of those movies as I keep coming across classics that kind of slip through the cracks. I'm just like, I can't believe I didn't watch this 20 years ago. It's a great movie. It's worth the time, and it's definitely something that I'll be watching again.
For sure. Um, Rev, you were great. I cannot thank you enough for coming on the channel to talk about this. I feel like I learned a lot, and I hope that anyone watching has also learned and got some recommendations, some directors and movies to come away with and watch. Tell the people what where they can find you and what they should check out from you.
Absolutely. So I am Rev Horror. My website is thehorrorrevolution.com. Just all spelled out, really easy to find. And I'm at Rev Horror on Instagram and Twitter. I interact with people constantly. So if anybody's got any recommendations of anything they want to see, or like I said, huge supporter of indie horror. If anybody wants to send me a movie to review, I'm happy to watch it. I actually just got sponsorship by a company called Night Terror Studio. They make some really cool Friday the 13th Jason mask and all kinds of different different art and ways. I mean, they've got a clown one and one from each movie, and they do a lot of tumblers as well, and it's all custom, so you can kind of request what you want and get whatever you want to have bookshelf with your collection. So huge recommendation of them. You can use RevHorror as the code and get 10% off. Beyond that, my stuff, thehorrorrevolution.com, man, I've got a ton of great stuff coming up all the time. I've got a new interview coming soon with the stylist director, Jill Six, is who she is on Twitter. and just it's anything you're looking for, man. You're probably going to find it there, and if you don't, hit me up. I'm happy to watch something else.
Absolutely. I know. I think I told you this when I first reached out to you, but I saw your top 10 list of French horror extremity films, and yeah, they're films that I put on my watch list. I'm not dying to watch them because I know how absolutely brutal they can be. Um, but I just thought your list were like so they were such good reviews, and it made me excited about those movies. And I think that people who will go to your website will find that whether it's a movie they've seen already or haven't seen, I think you're going to make them excited about that film, want to rewatch it or watch it for the first time. It's a really great website, especially if you love horror movies.
I really appreciate that, man. And like I said, it's a pleasure being on. I appreciate you having me, and we'll have to do it again.
Absolutely, we will have to. I appreciate your time, Rev. You've been great. Again, thank you so much.
Absolutely.